Read the manual, moron! Claire Whitmore's voice sliced through the glass-walled conference room with such force that every conversation stopped at once. The words echoed beneath the polished steel beams, bounced off the giant digital displays, and settled into a silence filled with awkward smiles and lowered eyes. More than 200 employees watched from the engineering floor below, pretending to work while secretly waiting to see how the quiet contractor would respond. Nathan Brooks didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He didn't even flinch. Instead, he looked down at the thick technical manual that had landed across the conference table, its pages slightly bent from the careless throw. His weathered work shirt still carried faint traces of machine oil from the production floor, and his faded wedding band caught the morning sunlight spilling through the 40-foot windows. He simply reached forward, straightened the book with steady hands, and opened it. Claire folded her arms. Well? Is reading too difficult now? A few nervous chuckles drifted through the room. Someone whispered that the maintenance contractor was about to be fired before lunch. Another quietly shook his head, convinced the man had no idea what he was doing inside one of the most advanced manufacturing companies in America. Nathan never acknowledged a single comment. He slowly turned the cover page as though he had performed the same motion thousands of times before. His calm expression never changed. His blue eyes lingered on the printed title for only a heartbeat before settling on the line beneath it. LED System Architecture Manual. Principal Design Author. Nathan Brooks. His own name stared back at him in crisp black letters. He rested one finger lightly against the page, almost as if greeting an old friend. No one else noticed. Not yet. Claire had already turned away, more concerned with the flashing red warning lights on the production dashboard than with the contractor she believed had wasted everyone's time. The automated assembly lines had been frozen for nearly 45 minutes. Every minute cost the company another small fortune, and every executive in the room knew it. The pressure hung in the air heavier than the hum of industrial ventilation. Screens displayed error codes no one seemed able to explain. Consultants from 3 different states had offered theories. None had solved the problem. Nathan quietly closed the manual again and rested both hands upon it without saying a word. Around him, executives exchanged impatient glances. To them he looked ordinary, just another middle-aged single dad earning hourly pay to support his daughter after school. They saw the worn boots, the inexpensive watch, the tired face of a man who clearly worked with his hands. They never imagined those same hands had once drawn the very blueprints controlling every machine surrounding them. Claire stepped toward the center of the room again, her voice colder now. You have 30 minutes. Either you prove you belong here, or security will escort you out. The countdown clock appeared on the largest screen. 30 minutes. Hundreds of eyes fixed themselves on Nathan Brooks. He looked once more at the manual resting beneath his fingertips, took a slow breath, and offered the smallest nod, not to the CEO, not to the executives, but to the forgotten name printed quietly on the first page. Nathan Brooks glanced once at the countdown clock mounted above the production dashboard. 29 minutes and 48 seconds remained. He neither rushed nor hesitated. He gently lifted the manual from the conference table and walked toward the silent control station while dozens of executives watched with growing skepticism. Claire Whitmore remained near the center of the room, her expression composed but impatient. She had built a reputation for making difficult decisions quickly, and from everything she had seen that morning, the quiet contractor standing in front of her looked completely out of place. One senior engineer cleared his throat. Madam Chief Executive Officer, perhaps we should call the manufacturer again. Another consultant nodded. Their emergency response team is already flying in from Seattle. Claire folded her arms without taking her eyes off Nathan. If they solve it before he does, his temporary contract ends today. The words settled over the room like cold winter air. Nathan never reacted. Instead, he opened the manual with practiced care and turned several pages without appearing to read them. His fingertips moved instinctively, stopping on diagrams that seemed strangely familiar. He smiled so faintly that no one noticed. The pages had changed colors over the years. The company logo had been modernized. Even the typography looked newer. But the architecture beneath every illustration remained exactly as he remembered. Across the room, several younger engineers quietly exchanged puzzled looks. One of them leaned closer to another and whispered, "How does a maintenance contractor know where every section is without checking the index?" The other shrugged. "Maybe he is pretending." Nathan continued walking until he reached the primary diagnostic terminal. He did not touch the keyboard immediately. Instead, he listened. Beneath the constant hum of ventilation fans and distant conveyor motors, another sound drifted through the building. A repeating mechanical pulse. Soft. Uneven. Almost hidden beneath everything else. He closed his eyes for only a moment. Years earlier, he had trained himself to recognize that exact rhythm before warning lights ever appeared. Some habits never disappeared. Claire stepped forward. "Are you planning to fix the system, or simply admire it?" Nathan finally answered, his voice calm enough that several people leaned closer to hear. "The machines are trying to tell us where they are hurting." A few executives frowned. Someone quietly laughed. One consultant muttered that machines did not have feelings. Nathan simply nodded. "No. But good engineers learn to listen anyway." Without another word, he placed the manual beside the terminal and entered a sequence of commands that no one in the room recognized. The display instantly changed. Hidden diagnostic menus appeared one after another. Conversation stopped. The engineering director stared at the monitor with widening eyes. "Those menus are not available to standard users." Another engineer quickly checked his own workstation. The same screens refused to appear. Claire took one slow step closer. Her confidence remained, but curiosity had quietly begun replacing certainty. Nathan continued navigating the system with the ease of someone walking through a childhood neighborhood. He was not searching. He was remembering. Somewhere deep inside the company, long-forgotten decisions were beginning to awaken, and for the first time that morning, the room grew quiet enough for everyone to hear the steady ticking of the countdown clock. Nathan Brooks kept his eyes on the diagnostic screen while the hidden menus unfolded one after another with quiet precision. The countdown continued above the room. 24 minutes remained. Nobody spoke. Even the consultants who had arrived carrying expensive laptops now watched the contractor instead of their own displays. Claire Whitmore slowly approached until she stood only a few feet away. She studied the unfamiliar interface glowing across the monitor. "Where did you get administrator access?" she asked. Nathan continued typing at an unhurried pace. "It was never hidden from the people who built it." Claire frowned. "Our software vendor told us those engineering menus were permanently locked." Nathan looked at the screen instead of at her. "Only after the third generation. This facility still runs the original architecture underneath the upgrades." The engineering director immediately turned toward one of his senior managers. "Is that true?" The manager hurriedly opened several archived maintenance records. His expression shifted from confidence to uncertainty. "The original framework was never fully replaced. Every expansion was built on top of it." A quiet murmur spread through the conference room. Nathan rested one hand lightly on the manual, while the other navigated another sequence of commands. His movements were neither fast nor dramatic. They carried the rhythm of long familiarity, like a pianist returning to a melody learned decades earlier. On the production floor below, warning lights continued flashing across 3 assembly lines. Conveyor belts remained frozen. Robotic arms stood perfectly still beneath bright white factory lights. Every silent machine represented another minute of lost production, yet Nathan appeared completely untouched by the pressure surrounding him. His calmness puzzled everyone. Claire crossed her arms again, although the certainty in her posture had begun to soften. "If you really understand this system," she said carefully, "tell me why none of our engineers could find the fault." Nathan finally glanced toward her. There was no pride in his eyes, only quiet patience. "Because they searched where the alarms appeared instead of where the decisions were made." Several engineers exchanged confused looks. One of them quietly whispered, "What does that even mean?" Nathan reached toward the manual and opened it near the final pages. Between the printed diagrams rested a folded sheet of yellowed engineering paper, preserved so carefully that it looked almost forgotten by time itself. He unfolded it with remarkable care. Hand-drawn circuit notes covered the page in dark blue ink. Dates from nearly 20 years earlier lined the margins. Small handwritten corrections filled the empty spaces between printed specifications. One young engineer leaned forward until his glasses nearly slipped from his face. "Those are original development notes." Another stared at the handwriting before looking back at Nathan with growing disbelief. "How did you know they were still inside the manual?" Nathan smiled gently, almost to himself. "Because I never like throwing away good ideas." Silence followed. No one laughed this time. Claire reached toward the folded page but stopped just short of touching it. For the first time since the meeting began, she was no longer looking at a maintenance contractor. She was looking at a man whose memory seemed permanently woven into the very foundation of her company. Above them, the countdown clock quietly marked another passing minute, while somewhere deep inside the motionless factory, a single green status light suddenly flickered to life. The lonely green light remained steady for 3 long seconds before another indicator awakened beside it. Then another. Across the production floor, technicians instinctively looked upward as silent machines began exchanging signals that had been absent all morning. Nathan Brooks did not celebrate. He simply watched the diagnostic window as thousands of lines of system activity streamed calmly across the screen. 20 minutes remained on the countdown clock. Claire Whitmore looked from the monitor to the handwritten engineering notes, still resting beside the keyboard. Questions crowded her mind faster than she could ask them. "If these notes are authentic," she said carefully, "why has nobody in this company ever seen them?" Nathan answered without looking away from the display. "Because they were never meant to impress anyone. They were reminders for the next engineer who cared enough to understand the system instead of memorizing it." The words lingered in the room. Nobody interrupted. The engineering director suddenly turned toward the archives manager. "Search every personnel record we have. Go back at least 20 years. The manager hurried away with a tablet in hand while another executive contacted corporate headquarters. Within moments, old employment databases, scanned project files, and retired engineering records began appearing across several conference room displays. Every passing second brought more uncertainty than clarity. Nathan remained focused on the terminal. A new alert appeared, but instead of acknowledging it immediately, he listened once again to the gentle rhythm echoing from the factory below. The uneven mechanical pulse had nearly disappeared. "That is one problem solved," he said quietly. "The second one is still hiding." Claire frowned. "There are 2 failures?" Nathan nodded. "One created the shutdown. The other prevented the recovery." Several consultants exchanged uneasy glances. None of their reports had mentioned a second fault. Nathan reached beneath the control panel and gently opened a small access compartment that most employees had probably walked past for years without noticing. Inside rested a row of aging service switches covered by a thin layer of dust. He smiled faintly. "Nobody has opened this cabinet in a very long time," one young engineer whispered. "I have worked here for 6 years. I never knew that compartment existed." Nathan looked at him with quiet kindness. "That is because it was built for maintenance, not attention." While the others stared, Nathan adjusted a single switch no more than half an inch. Nothing dramatic happened. There were no flashing lights or loud alarms. Instead, somewhere deep inside the facility, a soft mechanical hum returned with smooth consistency, replacing the uneven pulse that had filled the building earlier. On the overhead production display, another row of warning messages quietly vanished. The room seemed to exhale all at once. At that very moment, the archives manager hurried back into the conference room, breathing hard from the rush. "I found something," he said, projecting an old personnel file onto the largest screen. A younger photograph of Nathan appeared beside a faded company identification badge dated 19 years earlier. Beneath the picture was a title that made every executive stare in stunned silence. Original lead systems architect. Primary control framework designer. Company founder special recognition recipient. Claire slowly looked from the screen to the quiet single father standing beside the terminal. The confident executive who had believed she understood every corner of her company suddenly realized she had never truly known the man standing in front of her. The conference room remained perfectly still as the old personnel record glowed across the giant display. Nobody questioned its authenticity anymore. The faded photograph, the archived engineering title, and the founder's recognition certificate all pointed to the same quiet man standing beside the diagnostic terminal. Nathan Brooks never looked toward the screen. His attention remained fixed on the system logs scrolling steadily before him. 18 minutes remained. Claire Whitmore lowered her voice for the first time that morning. "Why did you leave?" Nathan rested one hand gently on the edge of the console before answering. "Life changed." His reply was simple, but something about it carried more weight than any lengthy explanation could have offered. Claire waited, expecting him to continue. He did not. Instead, he opened another diagnostic panel and compared two streams of data that no one else seemed able to interpret. The engineering director finally broke the silence. "Sir, we have studied your architecture for years. None of us knew these maintenance pathways even existed." Nathan gave a small nod. "Because they were designed to stay invisible until someone needed them." The room fell quiet once again. Invisible. The word lingered in Claire's thoughts. She looked at the worn work boots, the faded shirt, the inexpensive tool pouch resting beside the manual, and suddenly realized that the man she had dismissed had been living by that same principle. Invisible by choice, not by failure. Her phone vibrated softly with another message from the board of directors asking for an update. She ignored it. For the first time since becoming chief executive officer, quarterly numbers no longer seemed like the most important thing inside the building. Nathan leaned closer to the monitor. A tiny fluctuation appeared deep inside one processing cluster before disappearing again. He smiled almost imperceptibly. "There you are." One consultant stepped closer. "Did you find the second fault?" Nathan nodded. "It was never broken. It was waiting for permission." Several puzzled expressions filled the room. Nathan pointed toward a small section of the architectural diagram. "Years ago I created a protection protocol. If conflicting commands ever reached the production core, the system would quietly refuse every instruction until someone verified the original design sequence." The engineering director blinked in disbelief. "You built the shutdown intentionally?" Nathan answered gently. "I built a safeguard. Machines can recover from failure. Poor decisions are harder to repair." Those words settled deeply over everyone listening. Claire slowly lowered her folded arms. For the first time that day, she saw not only an engineer but also a father whose life had clearly taught him that prevention was kinder than regret. Nathan removed a simple flathead screwdriver from his worn tool pouch, knelt beside a narrow service panel beneath the console, and loosened two small screws with careful precision. There was no dramatic flourish, only quiet confidence earned through years of understanding. Behind the panel rested a tiny backup control module covered by nearly 2 decades of dust. Nathan brushed the dust away with the sleeve of his shirt and smiled softly when he noticed a handwritten label fading with age. The ink had nearly disappeared, but one sentence remained readable. "Trust the original sequence." Nathan gently pressed a single recessed reset switch. For one brief moment the factory became completely silent. Then, one by one, conveyor motors awakened with a smooth, steady rhythm, robotic arms lifted gracefully into position, and green status lights spread across the production floor like the first rays of sunrise after a long winter night. No one applauded. No one spoke. They simply listened as the building remembered the voice of the man who had taught it how to breathe. The steady rhythm of the assembly lines rolled through the building like a familiar heartbeat returning after a long silence. Green indicators now outnumbered red ones across every production display, and conversations that had once been filled with panic had dissolved into quiet disbelief. Nathan Brooks slowly tightened the last screw on the service panel and slipped the flathead screwdriver back into his worn tool pouch. He did not raise his hands in victory or look around for recognition. Instead, he closed the access panel with gentle care, almost as though he were thanking an old friend for keeping its promise. 15 minutes still remained on the countdown clock. Claire Whitmore stood motionless, watching him with an expression none of her employees had ever seen before. Confidence had given way to humility, and certainty had been replaced by genuine curiosity. "Is it over?" she asked softly. Nathan glanced toward the production dashboard. "The emergency is over. The lesson is just beginning." His words settled quietly across the room. The engineering director stepped toward the central monitor and began reading the recovery reports as they appeared one after another. Every production line had returned to normal operation. Every safety protocol reported healthy status. Not a single component required replacement. One consultant slowly removed his glasses and whispered almost to himself, "We spent 6 hours searching for defective hardware. The answer was hidden inside the original design philosophy." Nathan nodded gently. "Technology usually reflects the people who build it. If the foundation values patience, the system learns patience. If the foundation values shortcuts, the problems only become harder to see." Several younger engineers listened without taking notes. They knew they were hearing something no textbook could teach. Claire looked at the aging manual resting beside the terminal. "Why did you never tell anyone who you were when you arrived this morning?" Nathan smiled faintly. "Because I came here to repair a system, not introduce myself." The simplicity of the answer left the room silent again. His phone vibrated quietly inside his pocket. He glanced at the screen and a warm expression softened the tired lines around his eyes. The message came from his 12-year-old daughter, Lily. It read, "Good luck today, Dad. Do not forget you promised to pick me up at 3:30. Nathan locked the phone without replying, but the small smile remained. One engineer happened to notice the message preview and suddenly understood something far more important than the archived personnel file. This remarkable engineer had not disappeared because his talent had faded. He had simply chosen that being present for his daughter mattered more than holding an impressive title. The room grew even quieter as that realization spread from one face to another without a single word being spoken. Claire took a slow breath before asking the question that had stayed with her since the personnel file appeared. "If you built all of this, why did you never come back?" Nathan rested his hand lightly on the manual before answering. "Some chapters are meant to build companies. Others are meant to raise children. I never regretted choosing the second one." No one found a response. Outside the conference room windows, the afternoon sunlight poured across the factory floor, reflecting from polished machinery that had finally returned to life. For the first time that day, every person in the building understood that the greatest achievement standing before them was not the brilliant engineer who had rescued a failing system. It was the quiet single father who had never allowed success to become more important than the little girl waiting for him after school. The soft hum of the factory settled into a steady rhythm that sounded almost peaceful after hours of uncertainty. Employees who had been holding their breath all morning slowly returned to their stations, but few of them actually resumed working. Their attention remained fixed on Nathan Brooks. Word had already begun spreading across every department that the quiet maintenance contractor was far more than anyone had imagined. 12 minutes remained on the countdown clock, although nobody cared about it anymore. The crisis had ended long before the timer reached 0. Nathan gently closed the worn manual and placed it neatly on the conference table exactly where it belonged. He picked up his small tool pouch and brushed a trace of dust from his sleeve with the same quiet care he had shown every machine in the building. Claire Whitmore watched every movement. The sharp confidence that had once defined her posture had disappeared, replaced by the uncomfortable awareness that respect could not be demanded by a title alone. She took a slow step forward. "Nathan." He looked at her calmly. "Yes?" She hesitated, something that surprised even herself. "I owe you an apology." The room became perfectly still once again. Executives who had negotiated billion-dollar contracts without hesitation now remained silent, sensing that this moment mattered more than any business decision. Claire lowered her eyes briefly before meeting his again. "I judged you before I knew you. I spoke without understanding who you were or what you had already given this company. I was wrong." Nathan listened without interrupting. There was no satisfaction on his face, no trace of victory, only quiet attention. After a long moment, he answered gently. "Everyone makes quick decisions sometimes. What matters is whether we are willing to make better ones afterward." Those simple words seemed to release the tension that had filled the conference room since morning. One of the younger engineers quietly smiled. Another looked down, remembering the jokes whispered only an hour earlier. Across the production floor, several technicians removed their headsets just to listen. Claire glanced at the manual resting between them. "I spent years studying leadership," she admitted. "Today I realized I have never truly studied humility." Nathan smiled faintly. "Leadership is easier when people feel seen. Machines are not very different. Ignore the small warnings long enough, and eventually they stop asking quietly." The engineering director slowly closed his laptop. "I think that advice applies to more than software." Nathan nodded. "It usually does." At that moment the elevator doors opened, and several members of the corporate board hurried into the conference room after receiving news that the production shutdown had ended. They expected celebration, explanations, and reports. Instead, they found an unusual silence. No one rushed to speak first. Every executive's attention remained on the quiet single father standing beside the control terminal with his weather tool pouch resting at his feet. One board member looked toward Claire. "Who resolved the failure?" Before Claire could answer, another senior executive noticed the archived personnel records still displayed across the giant screen. His eyes widened with recognition. He whispered almost involuntarily, "Nathan Brooks." The name moved through the room like an echo from another generation. Some remembered stories told by retired engineers. Others had only heard fragments about the brilliant architect who had quietly disappeared years earlier without asking for recognition. Nathan simply slipped the manual gently toward the center of the table so the next engineer could find it easily. Then he glanced at the clock on the wall. School dismissal would begin soon, and somewhere across town a 12-year-old girl was already trusting that her father would keep another promise. The senior executive slowly walked toward Nathan Brooks with an expression that blended disbelief and genuine respect. His silver hair and measured stride reflected decades inside the company, and when he finally stopped only a few feet away, he extended both hands instead of offering a formal greeting. "I never thought I would see you here again," he said quietly. Nathan accepted the handshake with the same calm humility he had shown throughout the day. "It has been a long time." The executive smiled gently. "Long enough for an entire generation of engineers to know your systems, but never meet the man behind them." Around the conference room, younger employees exchanged curious glances. Many had memorized procedures, diagrams, and maintenance standards bearing Nathan's name without ever realizing the author might one day stand beside them carrying a worn tool pouch. Claire Whitmore watched the conversation unfold in thoughtful silence. Every assumption she had made that morning now seemed painfully shallow. The senior executive turned toward the room. "Some of you joined this company after the expansion. Others came after the public offering. But before any of that happened, Nathan Brooks designed the control architecture that allowed this business to grow from a regional manufacturer into a national leader. The stability you take for granted every day began with his work." Nobody interrupted. Even the quiet hum of the factory seemed distant beneath the weight of those words. One engineer slowly raised a hand. "If he was that important, why was his name never mentioned during orientation?" The executive gave a reflective smile. "Because he asked for it to be removed from presentations. He believed good engineering should make the company stronger, not the engineer more famous." Claire lowered her eyes. That answer explained more than any personnel record ever could. Nathan had never disappeared because he had failed. He had stepped away because recognition had never been the goal. Nathan looked toward the broad factory windows where the restored production lines moved with smooth precision beneath the afternoon sun. Buildings change, he said softly. Technology changes. Titles change. Character has to remain the same, or none of those things matter for very long. The words settled deeply across the room. One by one, employees quietly closed their laptops. Phones disappeared into pockets. Nobody wanted to distract from the rare honesty filling the space. Claire stepped forward again, holding the technical manual with both hands instead of leaving it on the conference table. She carefully offered it back to Nathan. This belongs to you. Nathan looked at the familiar cover before gently shaking his head. No. It belongs here. He rested his hand lightly against the manual for a brief moment. Knowledge only has value when the next person can find it. Claire slowly placed the manual back at the center of the table, understanding the gesture far better than she would have only an hour earlier. At that moment, the conference room doors opened once more as an elderly gentleman entered with measured steps, accompanied by only a single assistant. The conversation stopped instantly. Several long-time executives straightened their posture without being asked. Nathan turned toward the doorway, and for the first time all afternoon, genuine surprise appeared across his face. The elderly founder smiled warmly the moment their eyes met. Without any announcement or ceremony, he walked directly past every executive in the room and stopped in front of the quiet, single father. His voice carried only gratitude as he said, "Nathan, I have been hoping for years that I would have the chance to thank you in person." The elderly founder stopped within arm's reach of Nathan Brooks and smiled with the quiet warmth of a man revisiting one of the finest decisions of his life. Without concern for titles, cameras, or protocol, he extended both hands and clasped Nathan's firmly. "You built more than a production system," he said softly. "You built the values that carried this company through every difficult year." The conference room remained completely silent. Claire Whitmore watched the moment unfold with deep respect, realizing that genuine influence was measured not by authority, but by the lives quietly strengthened over time. The founder turned toward the executives gathered around the table. "Many of you know the company we became. Nathan remembers the company we hope to become." His words settled gently across the room. "When he designed the original architecture, he insisted that every safeguard protect people before profits. He believed the best system was the one that prevented mistakes from becoming disasters. We argued about deadlines. He argued about responsibility. Looking back, he was right. Several board members lowered their eyes. They had spent years celebrating quarterly growth without ever hearing the story behind the foundation that made it possible. Claire stepped closer to Nathan. "I would like to offer you the position of Chief Technology Officer," she said sincerely. "You can choose your own team, your own office, and any compensation package you believe is fair. This company would be honored to have you lead us." Every face in the room turned toward Nathan. The offer represented everything many engineers dreamed of achieving. Nathan looked briefly toward the factory floor where the machines continued moving with calm precision. Then he glanced at the clock. 3:21 in the afternoon. He smiled gently. "It is a generous offer." Claire waited hopefully. Nathan slipped his worn tool pouch over his shoulder before answering. "But there is someone expecting me in front of Lincoln Elementary at 3:30. She has waited through enough difficult days in her life. I promised her that whenever I could, I would be there before the final bell." The founder smiled knowingly. "Still keeping your promises?" Nathan nodded. "The important ones?" Claire felt emotion rise in her throat. "Would you at least allow us to recognize what you have done today?" Nathan rested his hand on the familiar manual lying at the center of the conference table. He gently turned it until the cover faced everyone in the room. "Manuals are written so people can learn," he said quietly. "Never so they can be used to make someone feel small. If this company remembers that, today will have been worth far more than repairing a production line." No one spoke after that. Nathan offered a respectful nod to the founder, another to Claire, and quietly walked toward the conference room doors. As they opened, The steady hum of the restored factory blended with the distant sounds of an ordinary afternoon. Employees standing along the hallway instinctively stepped aside, not because anyone instructed them to, but because respect had naturally replaced assumption. Nathan never looked back. Outside, the sunlight reflected across the parking lot as he climbed into his aging pickup truck and started the engine. Across town, a little girl would soon see the familiar truck pull into the school pickup lane exactly as promised. Inside the company he left behind, the conference room remained silent long after he was gone. The manual stayed on the table, open to its first page, where one quiet name reminded everyone that true greatness never needed to announce itself because dignity, character, and kindness always speak the loudest when the room finally becomes silent.